Delivery entrance is around the back, sweetheart. Unless you're here for the trash pickup, in which case the dumpster is behind the hangar. The smirk on the pilot's face lasted only a moment. That was how long it took him to decide the woman walking toward his plane didn't belong there. It was also, though he didn't know it yet, the exact moment he destroyed his career. He stood at the base of the stairs like a man who had confused a uniform with a crown. Arms crossed, chin up, aviator sunglasses on despite the flat gray sky. The stance of someone who had made his decision before the conversation began and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. The woman he was blocking didn't stop walking. She didn't speed up either. She moved across the tarmac with the unhurried purpose of someone who had long since stopped proving things to rooms or to the people standing in front of them. She wore a faded Howard University hoodie, dark leggings, and a pair of worn New Balance sneakers that had seen better years. She carried a canvas tote bag over one shoulder, the kind of bag that gets its character from use, not from a designer. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was bare. She had been awake for many hours. She looked to a man like Captain Harlan Thorpe like she was lost. She was not lost. Behind her, the tarmac at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey stretched wide and cold under a February sky the color of old pewter. Teterboro was not the kind of airport where ordinary people landed. There were no TSA lines here. No families dragging roller bags, no departure boards counting down to flights filled with people in middle seats eating pretzels from foil packets. This was where money moved quietly, black SUVs pulling up to gleaming jets, pilots in pressed uniforms. The air carried the sharp, clean smell of jet fuel and expensive leather cleaning products. The plane at the center of this story was a Bombardier Global 7500, tail number N720NO. Matte graphite and white livery, stairs deployed, engines cold and waiting. It was worth millions. It could fly nonstop from New York to Hong Kong. It had walnut interior panels, cream leather seats, and a single white orchid in a ceramic vase on the dining table. The woman in the hoodie had chosen that orchid herself. She had chosen every detail of that plane. She had bought it months ago with her own money after her company went public at a valuation of $2.1 billion. And the only person in the world who thought that was excessive was her mother, who called from Baltimore to ask if she really needed such an airplane. Amani had said no, she bought it anyway. Captain Harlan Thorpe knew none of this. In minutes, he would know all of it. But first, he was going to make every mistake available to him. Slowly, publicly, and though he would not discover this until it was far too late, on camera. Before we get into what happened next, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. We love hearing from this community from all over the world. And if you have ever been judged before someone even learned your name, this story is for you. Hit subscribe and stay with us. We are just getting started. The Meridian Aviation FBO at Teterboro operated on a specific kind of silence. Not the silence of emptiness. The building was always moving, always processing, always producing the quiet machinery of private air travel. It was the silence of money that did not need to announce itself. Concierge staff who knew your preferred sparkling water brand before you asked. Ground crews who moved with the precision of people who understood that when clients paid this much, delays were personal. The glass and brushed steel lobby smelled faintly of cedar and fresh flowers. The carpets were dark charcoal. The lighting was warm and deliberate. There were no departure screens, no gate numbers, no announcements over a public address system. You simply arrived, and the system that had been waiting for you moved without friction. Imani Brooks arrived in a well-used Honda CR-V with a dent in the rear bumper. It belonged to her assistant's husband, who had been kind enough to drive her from the hotel. She thanked him twice and tipped him generously in cash before he pulled away. She walked through the glass doors. The young man at the concierge desk, Leo, straightened when he saw her face. "Good morning, Ms. Brooks. N720 is fueled and ready on ramp 4. The crew completed pre-flight this morning." "Thanks, Leo. Don't radio ahead. I want to board quietly." "Of course. The order is loaded as requested." She nodded and pushed through the side door toward the ramp. The cold hit her immediately, a thin, cutting February wind that smelled of fuel and metal. She pulled her hoodie tighter and walked. She did not rush. She had learned years ago that rushing communicated anxiety, and anxiety was the one thing she could not afford to show. She had been awake since the middle of the night finishing a logistics contract negotiation that had taken days to close. She had done it via video calls from a hotel room, operating on bad coffee, and the particular ferocity that comes from knowing every person on the other side of the screen had underestimated her and was about to regret it. She had closed the deal late the night before. She had packed her bag at midnight. She had been moving ever since. She just wanted to go home to Atlanta. She wanted the orchid and the walnut panels and the cream leather and the particular silence of being 39,000 feet above everything that wanted a piece of her. She walked toward ramp 4. She saw her plane first, the matte graphite and white of it catching the gray morning light like something polished. N720NO. She had chosen those letters herself. N for November, the aviation phonetic alphabet. 72 for the year her mother was born. No, because her mother's name was Nora Brooks, and because Imani had spent her entire adult life turning other people's no into something they hadn't seen coming. At the base of the stairs stood Captain Harlan Thorpe. Imani Brooks was a woman who had built the largest independent tech-driven freight network in the mid-Atlantic from a single brokerage license and a laptop in a Baltimore studio apartment when she was young. She was the daughter of a hospital orderly and a school bus driver, two people who had given her everything they had, which was not money, but was something more durable. She had attended Howard University on a partial scholarship and a full complement of stubbornness. She had studied logistics and operations management because she understood even then that the world ran on the movement of things, and the people who controlled that movement held a specific kind of power that did not require a famous name or a family connection. Vantage Logistics Group had gone public months ago at a valuation of $2.1 billion. She owned 58% of the shares. She had not changed her phone number, her neighborhood in Atlanta's West End, or her preference for worn-in sneakers. She had, after much internal debate, bought a plane. She held a private pilot certificate with instrument rating earned during what she called the loneliest stretch of her career, a period when she was scaling the company through a brutal freight market and needed something that felt like hers alone. She had taken lessons early on Saturday mornings at a small airport outside Baltimore, flying small Cessna planes over the Chesapeake Bay, while the city below her had no idea she existed. She had earned her instrument rating in 11 months. She had logged hundreds of hours before the company consumed every remaining hour of her life. She never advertised the license. There was no strategic reason to keep it quiet. She simply did not see it as a credential worth name-dropping. She flew because she loved the honesty of altitude, where the only thing that mattered was whether you had done the work correctly. The sky did not care about your hoodie. Captain Harlan Thorpe was a man in his mid-50s who had been flying for decades, which he considered sufficient qualification to have an opinion about everything. He was the third generation of his family to hold a pilot certificate. His grandfather had flown wartime missions, his father had been a major airline captain, and Harlan had grown up understanding that the cockpit was his birthright. He wore this history the way some men wear a family crest, visibly and with the expectation that others would be impressed. He had thousands of hours of total flight time. He was technically competent when he paid attention, when he supervised properly, when he did not allow the weight of his own self-regard to make the boring parts of the job feel beneath him. He had prior complaints in his file at Pinnacle Charter Management, a black physician who had been asked twice if he was sure he had the right aircraft, a Latina executive who had been directed to wait in the lounge when she arrived early rather than being offered the standard pre-flight greeting, a young Arab-American man who had been asked to show identification twice before boarding. Each complaint had been reviewed and closed by the same operations director. Each had been marked resolved without formal investigation. Harlan did not think of himself as a prejudiced man. He thought of himself as a professional who reads situations accurately. He had never examined the difference. This morning, he was in a good mood. He had a golf game booked for the next day in Atlanta. Brooke Landry was in her late 20s and had been flying as a cabin attendant with Pinnacle for over a year. She was from suburban Ohio, quick to laugh, skilled at reading a room, at reading specifically which person in the room held authority, and then orienting toward that person the way a plant orients toward a window. This was not malice, it was something she had learned so early she could no longer see it as a choice. She followed Harlan's lead because it was easier than not following it. She had not yet understood what that cost her. Kai Santos was 26 years old and had worked line service at Meridian Aviation for several years, fueling aircraft, loading luggage, positioning ground equipment. He had seen the dynamic that was about to unfold many times before in many variations. Wealthy passengers of color arriving in ordinary clothes being assessed at the door, being redirected or questioned or made to feel like problems. He had never been in a position to do anything about it. Today, he had his phone, a clear sight line from the cab of the fuel truck, and years of accumulated frustration that had finally found a moment to be useful. Imani reached the base of the stairs, the red carpet runner, the gleaming silver railing. She reached for it. Harlan stepped into her path. He did it casually, a half-step shift, the movement of a man who had decided the answer was no before hearing the question. He looked down at her through his aviator sunglasses. His voice was pleasant, which was somehow the worst part. Delivery entrance is around the back, sweetheart, unless you're here for the trash pickup, in which case the dumpster is behind the hangar. Imani stopped. She looked at him. She did not look angry. She looked like a woman running a calculation. I'm not delivering anything, she said. I'm boarding. Harlan's smile stayed fixed. The professional smile, the one that said, I am being patient with a situation that does not warrant my patience. Ma'am, this is a private charter aircraft. The client hasn't arrived yet. You'll need to clear the ramp area. I'm aware it's private, Imani said. It's mine. A beat. Harlan chuckled, a low rumbling sound that carried the specific register of a man humoring someone he had already stopped taking seriously. He took off his sunglasses, revealing pale blue eyes that held zero warmth. The owner is a VIP, he said. We're expecting her shortly. If you're with the catering company, you're actually early, which is great, but you'll still need to coordinate through the FBO side entrance. I'll have someone walk you over. I'm not with catering or the cleaning crew. The question landed. Imani did not flinch. She tilted her head slightly, the small, precise movement of a person deciding whether to correct a child or simply let the child finish. Up on the stairs, Brooke Landry appeared. She looked down at the woman below, the hoodie, the sneakers, the canvas bag, and popped her gum. Harlan, she's not catering. Catering wears the blue shirts. Right, Harlan said, unbothered. He turned back to Imani with the studied patience of a man used to being in charge of situations. Regardless, ma'am, you can't be on the ramp without authorization. This is a secured area. The main terminal is back through those glass doors. The desk staff can help you figure out where you need to be. I know where I need to be, Imani said. I need to be on that plane. My name is on the manifest. I would like to board. Something moved behind Harlan's eyes. Not recognition, recalibration. He looked her up and down quickly, practiced, the kind of assessment that had been refined through years of deciding who belonged where, and the calculation he made was visible to anyone paying attention. Can I see your boarding documentation? He asked. Can I see yours? Imani said. A silence. I'm the pilot, Harlan said. And I'm the owner, Imani said. So we're both exactly where we should be. Step aside, please. Harlan did not step aside. Instead, he took a half step closer, not threatening, space claiming, the casual territorial confidence of a man who expected the world to arrange itself around him. Look, I don't want any trouble here. We have a slot time to hit, and I've got a VIP arriving. Why don't we get someone from the FBO to sort this out? And if there's been some kind of mix-up with your booking? There's no mix-up, Imani said. Then you won't mind waiting inside while we verify, Harlan said smoothly. Standard protocol. The words standard protocol. Imani had heard that phrase deployed this way more times than she could count. It always meant the same thing. It was the bureaucratic clothing that certain kinds of decisions wore when they wanted to look like rules instead of choices. Standard protocol, she repeated slowly, is checking the manifest. Have you done that? The manifest shows the owner arriving by private vehicle, not on foot. I arrived by private vehicle, Imani said. Honda CR-V, gray, dropped off at the west entrance minutes ago. Is there a specific make of car required for ownership? I can write that into the company policy, if it's helpful. Brooke snorted from the stairs. She didn't mean for it to be audible. It was. Imani looked up at her, just looked. Brooke's snort died in her throat. Harlan's patience, which had been theatrical from the start, was developing a slight edge. This was not how these situations usually resolved. Usually, by this point, the person had either left or had raised their voice, which gave him the authority to escalate with clean hands. This woman had done neither. She was standing in front of him with a canvas bag on her shoulder and the specific composure of someone who had already won and was simply giving him time to understand it. He did not understand it. Ma'am, I'm going to be direct with you. I have responsibilities to this aircraft and to its owner that require me to take security seriously. You arrived without an escort, without prior notification, and without any visible identification. I can't allow an unknown individual to board a multi-million-dollar aircraft based on a verbal claim. That's not bias. That's professional judgment. Whose judgment? Imani said. Mine, Harlan said, as pilot in command. Pilot in command of my aircraft, Imani said. You understand the distinction. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned slightly and spoke towards the hangar. Malcolm, can you come out here for a second? If you have ever been told to wait for verification when you knew you didn't need to, you know exactly what this moment felt like. Leave a comment below and keep watching, because this is where it starts getting very interesting. Malcolm Reyes, the FBO operations supervisor, emerged from the hangar side door. He was a heavy-set man in his late 40s with the particular energy of someone who had worked in aviation long enough to mistake familiarity with authority. He took one look at Harlan's expression, one look at Imani, and made the same mistake Harlan had made, reached a verdict before asking a question. What's the situation? He directed the question at Harlan, not at Imani. This individual is claiming to be the aircraft owner, Harlan said. She walked up from the west gate unescorted. No vehicle, no ID presented. I asked her to wait inside while we verify, and she's declining. Note how he said this, every word technically accurate. But the architecture of it, talking about Imani in the third person while she stood 3 feet away, was its own statement about who was real and who was not. I have not declined anything, Imani said, keeping her voice level. I have been standing here for minutes waiting for someone to look at the manifest. I spoke to Rosa at the front desk on the way in. She recognized me. You can call her. Malcolm glanced at Harlan, a look that said, is this going to be a problem? Harlan gave the smallest shrug, the shrug that said, probably. From the cab of the fuel truck 30 yards away, Kai Santos watched the shrug. He had been watching since Harlan first stepped into the woman's path. He had the dispatch log on the clipboard beside him. N720 authorized. Contact, Imani Brooks owner, Vantage Logistics Group. He had seen her face somewhere before, something about the cheekbones, the steadiness in the eyes, a magazine cover in the break room months ago. Forbes or Bloomberg, he couldn't remember which. He opened his camera app. He propped the phone against the inside of the windshield at an angle that captured the base of the stairs and the full group clearly. He pressed record. Imani, meanwhile, had taken out her own phone. She did not call anyone. She sent a single text to a contact saved as Latrice, her chief of staff, her second brain, the woman who had been with Vantage since early on, and who operated with the calm precision of someone who had prepared for every contingency because Imani had taught her to. 3 words. Clock is running. Then she put the phone back in her pocket and waited. Malcolm stepped forward. He had the uncomfortable energy of a man who knew somewhere below the surface that this was wrong but who had traveled too far down the wrong road to easily reverse. The machinery of his assumptions had been running since the moment he walked out of that hangar door. And machinery, once running, wants to finish its cycle. Ma'am, he said, his tone carrying the specific brand of authority that is used to make unreasonable things sound like procedures. It's standard policy that we verify ramp access for all non-crew personnel. If you could step back inside the FBO, the desk staff can assist with verification. The desk staff already verified me, Imani said. Rosa at the front desk, she recognized my face. She has my name in the VIP log. You can pick up a radio and call her in seconds. Malcolm looked at Harlan again. The look said, she keeps saying that. Harlan's expression said, don't. Let's just get you inside where it's warm, Malcolm said, trying a different register, solicitous, parental. This is all just a formality. Nobody's saying you're not. You're saying I'm not, Imani said. That is exactly what you're saying. Every word out of both of your mouths since I arrived has been a version of the same sentence. You don't belong here. I'm asking you to check the manifest and prove yourself right or wrong. Why won't you do that? The question sat in the cold air between them. Neither man answered it because the answer, the honest answer, was that checking the manifest was not the point. The manifest was a tool they could use to confirm what they already believed or to correct it. They did not want to correct it. They were too far in now. Too far in. And she was still standing here, still calm, still not doing what people in her position were supposed to do, which was back down or blow up, either of which would give them something to point at. Inside the FBO building, Rosa Delgado had pulled up the VIP log the moment Malcolm called, asking her to confirm a passenger's identity remotely because the camera angle was bad. Rosa was in her late 30s, had been managing concierge operations at Meridian for years, and had a memory for faces that bordered on photographic. She had seen Imani Brooks before. She had recognized her the moment the CRV dropped her off at the West Gate and thought nothing of it because this was how Imani always arrived, quietly, in ordinary clothes, without a convoy. Rosa pulled up the entry. N720NO, Imani Brooks, primary owner, cleared for unescorted ramp access. She called Malcolm back immediately. He did not answer. She called Harlan's crew phone, voicemail. She left a message, the message she would later describe as the one they all wished they'd listened to. Then she grabbed her radio and her jacket and walked toward the ramp door. A charter captain intercepted her at the threshold, a question about a fuel discrepancy on another aircraft that was technically her responsibility to resolve. She was delayed by minutes. Outside, the situation was evolving. Harlan, backed by Malcolm's presence, had grown bolder. The dynamic had shifted from ambiguity into something that felt to him like established fact. This woman did not belong here. He had a witness. He had an operations supervisor. He had the weight of institutional authority on his side. He used the word ma'am. At this point, if you will not voluntarily return to the terminal, I'm going to have to flag this as a potential trespassing situation and request security. I don't want to do that, but I have a slot time and a crew to manage. Trespassing. There it was. The word was carefully chosen. It implied criminality. It shifted her from a person making a claim to a person committing an offense. It was designed to make her feel the weight of institutional machinery turning toward her, to make the path of least resistance feel obvious. Imani looked at him for a long moment. "Are you going to check the manifest?" she said. "The manifest. Are you going to check it?" she said again. The same words, the same tone, just slightly slower. "Or are you going to keep talking?" Harlan's jaw tightened. The pleasant professional mask developed a crack, just a small one, but visible. Brooke Landry, watching from the stairs, felt the first whisper of unease. There was something about this woman that was not computing correctly. The way she stood, the absence of panic or performance, the utter lack of defensiveness that people usually showed when challenged like this. Brooke had been flying with Harlan for over a year. She had seen dozens of boarding disputes. None of them had looked like this. None of them had asked the same clean question 3 times and waited for an answer, as if they had all day and weren't going anywhere. Malcolm made his decision. Later, trying to reconstruct how it happened, he would say he was trying to de-escalate. He would use the word unfortunate. He stepped toward Imani. He took her arm. Not a violent grab, a firm, presumptuous grip on her forearm. The grip of a man who had decided where she was going and was simply implementing that decision with his hands. "Ma'am, let's just step inside." And Imani went completely still. She looked down at his hand on her arm. She did not pull away. She did not raise her voice. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only the people immediately around her could hear it. But it had a quality of finality that stopped everything. "Take your hand off me." Malcolm did not immediately release her. His hand stayed for one more second, the second in which, if he had possessed a single gram of self-awareness, he might have understood the magnitude of what he was doing. Then he let go. But the damage was done. And 30 yards away in the cab of the fuel truck, Kai Santos had captured every second of it in 4K. Kai had been running the video since the moment Malcolm walked out of the hangar. He had watched the whole thing, the blocking, the talking past, the trespassing word. The grip. His hands were steady. He was 26 years old, and he had watched too many versions of this scene in too many places to feel anything in this moment except a particular cold clarity. This was wrong. He had documentation of it. That changed things. He typed a caption, short, no hashtags, no commentary beyond the facts. This is happening right now at Teterboro Private Jet. She says it's hers. Watch how they treat her. He uploaded it to X. By minutes later, thousands of views, comments flooding. Who is she? What airline is this? Real? Someone identified the tail number N720NO. Someone cross-referenced the FAA aircraft registry. The registration was a public record, instant and unambiguous. Vantage Logistics Group, LLC, Principal Imani Brooks. Someone Googled the name Forbes, Bloomberg, Business Insider, the IPO announcement from months ago. Logistics founder takes company public at $2.1 billion valuation. A photograph. The same face, the same bone structure, the same steady eyes, different outfit, a navy blazer at a New York Stock Exchange bell-ringing ceremony. Same person. The comments section transformed. Oh, she owns that plane. That's her jet. The phrase Teterboro jet owner was trending on X. Kai watched the numbers climb from his fuel truck cab. His phone was still recording. His hands were still steady. I have to stop here for a second. What Kai did, the decision to post, the choice not to stay quiet, that's the moment that changes everything. Drop a comment if you were Kai. Would you post it? Or would you stay silent? Because silence and complicity aren't always as different as we tell ourselves they are. Now, let's keep going. Back on the ramp, Officer Jamal Hayes had arrived in the white Ford Explorer, amber lights cycling without sound. He stepped out alone, a large, precise man with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to observe before acting. He carried a tablet loaded with the day's VIP manifest. Harlan moved toward him immediately before Jamal could speak to Imani. Officer, thank you for responding. We have an individual who has refused multiple requests to vacate the ramp. She's claiming to be the aircraft owner but has provided no documentation and has been uncooperative. I'm concerned about ramp security. Jamal nodded. He looked at Harlan. He looked at Imani. He looked at his tablet. He scrolled. He stopped. Ma'am, he said. And the tone was already different from Harlan's, careful, professional, attentive. Your name, please. Imani Brooks, she said. Jamal looked at his tablet. His fingers scrolled, stopped, scrolled back. Could you spell the last name? Brooks. He looked at the tablet for a long moment. Then he looked at Imani. Something shifted in his expression, the careful professional attention sharpening into something that was almost recognition, not of her face, of the situation. Before he could complete his verification, Malcolm made the move that sealed everything, whether from frustration at the situation not resolving or from the simple momentum of having gone this far. He stepped forward and reached for Imani's arm a second time. Let's just step to the side and let the officer work. Imani's voice came before his hand arrived. Don't. One word, not loud, not angry, just absolute. Malcolm stopped. His hand hung in the air between them for a moment, then dropped. Jamal finished his verification. He held his tablet out and looked at Harlan with an expression that contained no cruelty, just fact delivered without cushioning. Captain Thorpe, the aircraft N720NO is registered to Vantage Logistics Group. The authorized operator on today's manifest is listed as Imani Brooks. He turned to Imani, spelled exactly as given. He returned her ID with both hands. Ms. Brooks, I apologize for the delay. You have ramp access. Harlan stared at the tablet. The pleasant professional mask was gone. What replaced it was the specific expression of a man who had made a very large miscalculation and could see clearly, and all at once, every step of the path that had led him here. There must be an error in the... There's no error, Jamal said. Harlan looked at Imani for the first time. Behind the aviator sunglasses, now back on his face, there was something new. Not remorse. Not yet. The desperate arithmetic of a man trying to understand how badly he had miscalculated and whether there was still a way out. Ms. Brooks, he started, his voice finding a new gear, placating, reasonable, the tone of a man who believed he could manage this. I want you to know that everything I did today was in the interest of protecting the asset. I had no way of knowing... You had every way, Imani said. You chose not to use them. She picked up her canvas bag. She walked to the stairs. She placed her foot on the first step. She paused. She turned and looked at Harlan over her shoulder, not with anger, with something colder and more permanent. Get in the cockpit, she said. Do your pre-flight. We have a slot time to hit. She walked up the stairs and disappeared into the aircraft. Inside the forward cabin, Imani set her bag on the seat across from her own and stood still for a moment. The orchid in the white ceramic vase was tilted slightly. The ramp crew had placed it off-center. She reached out and straightened it. Her mother had always said a crooked flower is just asking to be noticed. She looked out the oval window. Harlan was still at the base of the stairs talking to Malcolm in a lowered voice, a man conducting a post-mortem on a mistake he had not yet admitted was his. The memory came without invitation. The worst ones always did, Baltimore, Maryland. Imani is young. Vantage Logistics Group is new and operating out of a desk in a shared co-working space on North Howard Street. She has a freight brokerage license, a second-hand laptop, and a signed letter of intent from a regional pharmaceutical distributor that represents, if she can execute it, hundreds of thousands in revenue. The catch is, she needs working capital to cover the refrigerated trucking contracts before the client's first payment clears. She is sitting in a regional bank on North Charles Street. The loan officer's name is Greg. He is in his 50s. Silver hair, wedding ring, framed photo of a yellow Labrador on his desk. He takes her application, bound, tabbed, with years of projected financials and a signed letter of intent from a company that has been in business for decades. And he flips through the first pages. He sets it down. Ms. Brooks, he says, his voice is not unkind. That is somehow the part that stays with her the longest. How not unkind he sounds. This is impressive work, really, but logistics is a tough industry for someone in your position. My position, Imani repeats. Small, independent, first-generation entrepreneur without collateral or an established credit history in the business name. The risk profile. I have a signed contract, she says, with a company that has operated continuously for decades and carries an A- credit rating. The contract covers more than the loan amount. Right. But the risk profile of the borrower. What specifically, Imani says, and her voice is very still. About my risk profile makes it higher than a man with the same contract and the same numbers. Greg clears his throat. He does not answer the question. He smiles the pleasant smile of a man who has already made his decision and is simply being professional about communicating it. He tells her the bank will be in touch. They are not in touch, not ever. She gets the money from her mother's church community in West Baltimore, women who pulled together the funds based on her mother's word alone. Her word that her daughter was good for it, that her daughter's word was a contract, that her daughter had not driven this far to stop here. Imani paid them back with interest in months. She sent each of them a handwritten letter and a bouquet of white orchids. She has never forgotten Greg's smile when he set her documents down. The way it contained a whole sentence that his mouth never spoke. I have already decided I'm simply being polite about telling you. She had turned that bank's no into the largest independent freight network in the Mid-Atlantic. She had turned it into $2.1 billion on a stock exchange board. She had turned it into a multi-million-dollar aircraft with her mother's initials encoded in the tail number. Standing at the oval window now, watching Harlan at the base of her stairs, she recognized that smile. Different face, different city, different uniform. Same decision made before the conversation began. Same pleasantness used to make that decision feel like something other than what it was. The only difference was that this time she was not a young woman with a laptop and a dream. She was the woman who had made the dream into something that employed thousands of people and owned the plane he was standing in front of. She straightened the orchid one more time. Then she sat down, pulled her legs up under her, closed her eyes, and waited for the engines to start. She had not come here to be angry, she had come here to go home, and she was going to do exactly that, and a few other things along the way. By the time Imani had settled into the forward cabin, Kai Santos's video had reached tens of thousands of views. The aviation blogger who had reposted it was live tweeting updates. Someone just identified the tail number N720NO, FAA registry, shows Vantage Logistics Group, checking the principals. Seconds later, Vantage Logistics Group CEO is listed as Imani Brooks. Googling now. Then, with the particular punctuation of someone whose breath has caught, oh, oh no, that's her jet. Kai was watching the numbers from the fuel truck cab. He kept the phone recording. He had not said a word to anyone on the ramp. He simply documented. Back on the ground, Harlan was not done. In the minutes since Jamal had verified Imani's identity and she had walked up the stairs, Harlan had been conducting a rapid internal negotiation between his ego and his survival instinct. The survival instinct was losing. He had stood at the base of this woman's plane and told her the bus stop was on the main road. He had called her the cleaning crew. He had escalated to trespassing. He had called security. And when security verified her identity, he had watched her walk up the stairs without looking at him. This was not acceptable. He had been flying for decades. He had never lost. He was not going to start now. He climbed the stairs. Brooke was in the galley, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking, staring at the countertop. She heard him come up and watched him move through the galley toward the forward cabin without looking at her. She set the coffee cup down quietly. Harlan appeared in the cabin doorway. Ms. Brooks. He had composed himself, hat on, shoulders back, the full regalia of authority reassembled. Now that we have a moment before departure, I want to address what happened on the ramp. Imani did not look up from the window. We have a slot time, Captain. I'm aware, but this is important. I want you to know that my crew takes security very seriously. When someone approaches the aircraft without prior notification of a rival vehicle or escort, we have a professional obligation to treat it as a potential security situation. That's not a personal judgment, that's protocol. Imani was quiet for a moment, the quiet of someone choosing between several possible responses and selecting the most precise one. Tell me, she said, still looking out the window, when was the last time you stopped a white man in a business suit from boarding a charter aircraft to verify he wasn't a security threat? Harlan opened his mouth, closed it. Because I have been on multiple charter flights in recent months, Imani continued, her voice even. Not one time, not once, was I stopped before today. The only variable that changed is that today I'm wearing a hoodie. She turned and looked at him. You called me the cleaning crew while standing at the base of my plane. You can call it protocol if that word is more comfortable for you, but we both know what it was. That's not, he started. You also need to know, she said, that there is currently a video on X with your face in it that had tens of thousands of views the last time I checked. The number is climbing. She held his gaze. Get back in the cockpit. We'll talk on the ground. Harlan stood there for 2 more seconds, the 2 seconds of a man trying to find a response that doesn't exist. Then he went. His walk back was different from his walk in, shorter steps, less shoulder, the posture of a man carrying something heavier than he'd arrived with. Brooke appeared at the forward cabin entrance. She set a glass of water on the side table without being asked. She sat on the edge of the club seat across from Imani, knees together, hands in her lap. She did not look at the floor. She looked directly at Imani, and there was something in her eyes that had not been there on the tarmac, a specific rawness, the particular quality of someone who has been looking at themselves clearly for the first time in a while. Ms. Brooks, she said, I wanted to say something before we take off. Go ahead. The comment about the sneakers on the stairs, Brooks' voice was steady but required effort to keep that way. That was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I said it. I said it anyway because he was laughing, and it seemed easier to, I don't know, to be part of what was happening instead of separate from it. She stopped. That's a terrible reason, I know that. Imani looked at her. Over a year with Pinnacle, and this is the first time you've thought about this? A pause. The pause that was honest enough to be an answer. No, Brooke said. It's not the first time. It's the first time I've been sitting across from the person it happened to. Imani nodded slowly. When we land, Inspector Tara Moss from the FAA is going to ask you questions about today and about what you've observed in your time with Captain Thorpe. I need to know if you're going to tell the truth. Brooke didn't hesitate. Yes, all of it. All of it. Imani held her gaze for another moment. Then she nodded once and looked out the window. Go get me some water and then sit down and think about what all of it means. You're going to want to have it organized. Brooke went to the galley. She was gone for minutes. When she came back with the water, her eyes were dry and her face had the settled quality of someone who had made a decision and was at peace with it. Imani took the water. She pulled out her phone and dialed. Clock stopped running. Latrice answered on the first ring. Not yet. Still on the ground. I need everything on Thorpe. Full name Harlan Thorpe. Pinnacle Charter Management. Every complaint, every review, every name attached to the reviews. And I need you to call Inspector Tara Moss at the Atlanta FSDO. Tell her I may need her on the ramp when we land. Give me minutes. You have 7. And Latrice, there's a young man from the line crew at Teterboro. He filmed what happened on the ramp and posted it. I don't have his name yet. Find out who he is. I'll have it by the time your wheel's up. The engine spooled to life beneath her feet. The plane began to move. Through the oval window, the gray New Jersey sky pulled away from the concrete. And then, with the particular rush of gravity reversing itself, the ground dropped away. And there was only air and altitude and the enormous quiet permission of being above things for a little while. Imani closed her eyes. Tens of thousands of views, she had told Harlan. By the time they leveled off at cruising altitude, Kai Santos's video had millions. The Orchid had tipped again during the climb. She had straightened it multiple times now. She took it as evidence that the ceramic vase was slightly uneven. She would have it replaced in Atlanta. Her mother had always been particular about flower vases. A vase that can't hold its flower straight is just a container with pretensions, Nora Brooks had said, and Imani had laughed at the time and then never quite forgot it. The seatbelt sign chimed off. The plane hummed at cruising altitude. The world below was hidden by a solid undercast, and above the undercast, the sky was the specific deep blue that only existed up here, the color of altitude, the color of being somewhere most people never got to go. She should have opened her laptop. There were contracts to review, a logistics partnership proposal from a European freight company that needed a response soon, emails from the board about projections. She looked at the laptop in its case. She looked at the Orchid. She thought about a memory from years earlier when Vantage was growing faster than she could comfortably manage, which meant she was managing it uncomfortably, which was just how it was. She flew commercial. She would not own a plane for years, and she was on an early morning flight from Atlanta to Charlotte for a board presentation to a potential investor group. She was in business class, seat 3A, window. She purchased the ticket weeks ago. She boarded early. She found her seat. She settled in, opened her laptop, and was reviewing the deck for the 4th time when a flight attendant stopped at her row. Young woman, early 20s, blonde, rushed. She looked at Imani the way a person looks at something that doesn't quite fit where it's placed. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can I see your boarding pass?" Imani showed it. The attendant looked at the pass, looked at Imani, looked at the seat, looked at the pass again. "This seat is reserved for our premium customers. Did you purchase an upgrade at the gate?" "I purchased this ticket," Imani said, keeping her voice measured, "weeks ago. Direct from the airline website. It's a business class ticket." "Let me just check with my supervisor." The supervisor came, more checking. Whispered consultation between the two of them conducted just far enough away that Imani could see it happening, but could not make out the words. The man in the window seat across the aisle, white 50s sport coat, had not been asked to show anything. He arrived after Imani and settled in with a glass of orange juice, and nobody looked at him twice. "I'm so sorry for the confusion," the supervisor said, returning with a smile that had been professionally calibrated to be warm and empty simultaneously. "You're absolutely in the right seat." No explanation, no acknowledgement of what had just happened. No moment in which the supervisor looked Imani in the eye and said the word that would have required her to confront what the situation had actually been. Just confusion. "Sorry. Move on." Imani had moved on. She was excellent at moving on. She had been converting that kind of confusion into fuel for her entire adult life. Every time someone saw the wrong thing when they looked at her, saw a mistake, a misplacement, a person who needed to be redirected or verified or explained, she took the energy of it and put it somewhere useful. It had made her very successful and very tired and very, very good at standing still under pressure. She had moved on from Charlotte. She had moved on from Greg and his pleasant smile and his Labrador photograph. She had moved on from 100 versions of the same conversation in 100 different rooms. The only thing she hadn't quite managed to do was stop being surprised by it. She looked out the window at the deep blue above the clouds. She was surprised still that it could happen on the tarmac of her own airport in front of her own plane. She was surprised that it could still feel like something after all this time. She straightened the orchid again, then she went back to her contracts. The floor dropped without warning. Not a gradual bump, a violent, stomach-seizing drop. The kind that removes seconds from your life and deposits them somewhere you'll never get back. The plane plummeted, then caught, then shuddered, then banked hard to the right with a motion that felt nothing like turbulence and everything like something structural and wrong. Imani grabbed both armrests. Her tablet launched off the side table and hit the walnut paneling. The orchid vase skidded off the table edge and hit the carpet, shattering. White petals scattering across the dark floor, water pooling near the base of the opposite seat. The plane shuddered again, overcorrected left, then yawed back right with a grinding, unsteady lurch. From the galley, a sharp crash, something metallic on marble. Brooke's voice, wordless and involuntary. The seatbelt sign dinged 3 times in rapid succession. This was not turbulence. Imani had hundreds of hours in her logbook. She had flown in actual instrument conditions over the Chesapeake Bay at night with a failed artificial horizon and a wind shear that had dropped her hundreds of feet in seconds. She knew what different kinds of wrong felt like in an airplane. She knew what it felt like when a pilot had disconnected the autopilot and was fighting a role he didn't understand. Each overcorrection making the next oscillation worse. The intercom crackled. "Folks, we've encountered some unexpected rough air." Harlan's voice, controlled, but underneath the control there was an edge. The specific, barely contained edge of a man who was not in command of the situation and knew it. "Sit tight. It's temporary." Imani unbuckled. The plane shuddered again, banking right. She braced against the bulkhead, found her footing, and moved toward the cockpit door. The floor was tilting, not dramatically, but persistently, with the stubborn lateral pull of a wing that was heavier than it should be. She looked at the instrument screen visible through the partially opened cockpit door. She could see it from here. She didn't need to see much, just the fuel display, just the numbers on the left and right wing tanks. Left tank heavier, right tank lighter. Hundreds of pounds of difference. The plane was wing heavy on the left. The autopilot had been fighting to correct the resulting roll for the entire flight. At some point in the last few minutes, probably, when Harlan had grown frustrated with the subtle, persistent yawing, he had disconnected the autopilot. Now he was fighting the imbalance manually, each correction inducing a counter-roll, each counter-roll requiring a new correction. He was making it worse with every input. She entered the emergency access code on the keypad. She had memorized it the week she took delivery of the aircraft, along with every maintenance procedure, every system diagram, every circuit breaker location. She had done this not because she expected to need it, but because she believed fundamentally that if you owned something, you understood it. The door clicked. She pushed it open. The cockpit was an orchestra of wrong sounds. The master caution chime cycling, the autopilot disconnect tone, the wind noise elevated from the plane's uncoordinated flight. Harlan was on the side stick with both hands, white-knuckled, jaw set, the posture of a man who had decided that more effort was the answer to a problem that was caused by the wrong kind of effort. Diego Morales, the first officer, sat beside him with his hands near the throttle controls, not touching them, looking at Harlan with the uncertain expression of a young man who knew something was wrong, but had been trained to defer to the man in the left seat. "Get out," Harlan's voice, immediate and sharp. "Get back in your seat." "You have a fuel imbalance," Imani said. She kept her voice level, not calm exactly, but controlled, precise, the voice she used when the situation required clarity, and she was the only person providing it. "Left wing is heavy. You disconnected the autopilot because you thought it was fighting you. It was fighting the imbalance. You are the variable that made this worse. It's a sensor error. The gauge is..." Look at the fuel display. He was looking at the attitude indicator, the natural instinct. When something feels wrong, the body wants to look at the thing that shows orientation. But the attitude indicator was only showing him the symptom. The fuel display would show him the cause. "Look at the fuel display, Harlan." The use of his first name. He looked. The numbers were right there. They had been right there since Teterboro. They had been right there for the entire flight, waiting for anyone to notice. The color left his face. "Open the cross-flow valve," Imani said. She turned to Diego Morales, whose eyes were wide but whose hands were steady. "Mr. Morales, cross-flow valve left to right. Now." Diego looked at Harlan. Harlan was looking at the fuel display. His hands were still on the side stick. The plane shuddered again. "Mr. Morales," Imani said again. "Now." Diego reached up and opened the cross-flow valve. Gravity would move fuel from the heavy left tank to the lighter right, slowly equalizing the imbalance. She turned back to Harlan. "Engage the autopilot. Take your hands off the side stick. The fly-by-wire system will correct the roll in seconds. You are fighting the computer, and you are losing. Let it work." "I have control," Harlan said. His voice had the quality of something structural, a wall that wants to hold even after the foundation has gone. "You have the side stick," Imani said. "That is not the same thing right now. Engage the autopilot." Seconds passed, seconds in which the plane continued its unsteady lateral motion, in which the master caution chimed, in which Diego Morales sat very still and watched a man decide whether his pride was worth more than the aircraft and everyone aboard. Harlan pressed the autopilot engage button. The plane smoothed out instantly. Not gradually, instantly. The computer made dozens of micro-corrections in the first seconds, adjustments too small for human hands, but precisely right for fly-by-wire. The shuddering stopped. The lateral yaw stopped. The master caution cycled once and went silent. The cockpit became very quiet. Imani stood there for a moment, one hand on the back of the pilot seat, her heart hammering in a way she was not going to allow on her face. "You forgot to balance the fuel at Teterboro," she said. Her voice was quiet now, not angry, precise. "You signed the dispatch release from inside the FBO. You did not walk the ramp. You did not verify the fuel load visually. You were on the tarmac for minutes telling me I didn't belong on my own plane. And during those minutes, no one was checking whether the fuel truck had loaded both wings equally." Harlan stared straight ahead through the windshield. The clouds below were soft and white and indifferent. "When it started causing issues, you disconnected the automation instead of looking at the fuel display. And when the passenger came to the cockpit and told you exactly what was wrong, your first response was to order her out." She paused. "How many hours do you have, Captain?" "Thousands," he said, barely audible. "And in all those hours, did you ever think arrogance would be the thing that cost you your aircraft?" "Nothing." She turned to Diego. He was young, he was pale, but his hands were still, and his eyes were clear. The eyes of someone who had been waiting for this moment without knowing it, who had been building toward a decision for months. "Mr. Morales, you are pilot in command for the remainder of this flight." "You can't reassign command," Harlan said. "Regulations." "Regulations also cover reckless operation and failure to conduct proper pre-flight procedures," Imani said. "We can discuss the full picture on the ground. Right now, I need someone flying my plane who is looking at the instruments instead of the mirror." She turned to Diego. "Get us to Atlanta." "Yes, ma'am," Diego said, and the steadiness in his voice was not bravado. It was the quiet solidity of someone who had just made a decision he would not regret. She turned and walked out of the cockpit. The door clicked shut behind her. In the cabin, Brooke was on her knees gathering the shattered pieces of the orchid vase. When she heard Imani come out, she looked up. Her eyes were wide. "We're okay," Imani said. "Leave that. Go strap in." She picked up the orchid from the carpet herself, one white flower stem intact, petals unbruised despite the fall. She set it in her water glass on the side table. It leaned at a slight angle, supported by the glass's rim, and held. Her mother used to say that a flower that survives the fall is a different thing entirely from a flower that never fell at all. She sat down. She buckled her seatbelt. She looked out the window at the clouds below and the deep blue above and the line between them where the world's ordinary business continued without knowing about any of this. "Minutes to Atlanta," Latrice called before landing. "I have everything organized," she said. "You want the summary or the detail?" "Summary first." Harlan's complaints are exactly as characterized. The operations director reviewed them quickly, too fast for any real investigation. The second and third complainants both received form letters acknowledging their concerns had been thoroughly reviewed. There is no investigation file for either. The first complainant received no response at all. Send everything to Pinnacle's board and copy the FAA notification to Vargas. Done. Inspector Tara Moss is on the ramp at PDK. She has requested the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder be secured upon engine shutdown. She also has Harlan's certificate records. And Kai, his flight departs Teterboro soon. He said yes immediately. A beat. His video is at millions of views. It's on CNN. The Associated Press has filed a story. Imani was quiet for a moment. Millions. She thought about Kai in the cab of that fuel truck, watching the whole thing unfold, making the choice to document it rather than drive to the next aircraft and go home and say nothing. The courage of that choice, quiet, anonymous, without a guarantee of any particular outcome, was not smaller than hers. It was just differently placed. Book him a good room. I'll cover it. And Latrice, find out about the other complainants, the ones Pinnacle already had on file, and anyone else who may have had a similar experience with Harlan and not filed formally. I want to know who they are. I'll have what I can find by morning. The landing gear extended with its heavy, reassuring thunk. Below, the lights of the Atlanta metro were beginning to emerge from the evening, the amber and gold grid of a city going about its business, vast and indifferent and home. The plane stopped at Atlantic Aviation FBO at PDK. The engines wound down into silence. Through the window, Imani counted the vehicles: a Vaughn's black Escalade, an airport operations truck with an amber light cycling, a silver government sedan with federal plates. Inspector Tara Moss, Atlanta FSDO. 3 vehicles exactly as arranged. The cockpit door opened. Harlan came out. He had put his jacket back on. He had straightened his hat. He looked to a casual observer like a captain at the end of a normal flight. But there was something in his movement that had changed. A fraction less height, a fraction less certainty in how his feet found the floor. The performance was intact. The confidence underneath it was gone. He walked to the cabin door without looking at Imani. He opened it. The stairs deployed. Georgia night air flooded in, cool and carrying the particular smell of a southern city in February. Imani stood. She picked up her canvas bag. She walked to the door. She paused at the top of the stairs and looked out at the reception waiting below. Latrice stood near the Escalade in her good coat, perfectly still, holding a folder. Beside the government sedan, a compact woman in her 50s with reading glasses, pushed up on her forehead, was reviewing something on a clipboard. Inspector Tara Moss, who had been investigating flight crew conduct violations for years and who was constitutionally incapable of being impressed by a captain's uniform. Harlan came out behind Imani and stopped when he saw the vehicles. His eyes went to the government plates on the sedan. His jaw did something that was almost invisible but was not. Is there a problem with the arrival?" he said. His voice was still steady. Give him credit for that. He was fighting to the last. Imani walked down the stairs, her New Balance sneakers on the red carpet, her canvas bag on her shoulder, her Howard University hoodie, ink-stained near the pocket, against the February night. She looked exactly as she had looked on the tarmac at Teterboro hours ago, which was to say she looked like exactly who she was. Latrice approached. The 2 women exchanged a glance that contained a full conversation. "Moss is ready," Latrice said. "Good." Harlan reached the bottom of the stairs. He saw Moss approaching. He activated the full force of his professional presentation. "Inspector, Captain Harlan Thorpe, Pinnacle Charter Management. I understand there was some concern about an in-flight anomaly. I want to be fully transparent. We encountered an imbalance in the fuel system mid-route, likely the result of a calibration issue at the departure FBO. I identified the issue and managed it appropriately. Safe landing, no incidents." Moss looked at him over the top of her clipboard with the expression of a woman who had been listening to this particular version of events for years. "Captain Thorpe," she said, "we'll go through everything in sequence. First, I'll need your license and medical certificate." A beat. Why? "There's been no standard procedure when we receive a report of a potential violation from an aircraft owner," Moss said. "The report was filed minutes ago." Harlan looked at Imani. "You filed a report." "I own the aircraft," Imani said. "I have a pilot certificate. I was in the cockpit during the event. Yes, I filed a report." He stopped himself, reconfigured. I was not informed she had a pilot's license. I'm aware, Imani said. I tend not to mention it because I shouldn't need to be a pilot to be treated with respect on my own aircraft. But since we're here, yes, I hold a private certificate with instrument rating. I know what a fuel imbalance looks like. I know what a pilot who has disconnected his autopilot and doesn't know why his plane is rolling looks like. And I know the difference between a sensor malfunction and a pre-flight check that wasn't done. Harlan looked around the ramp, Latrice, Moss, Diego Morales standing feet away near the nose gear, not offering support but not offering escape either. Brooke coming down the stairs behind him, arms wrapped around herself in the cold. Moss held out her hand. Your certificate, Captain. His hand went to his breast pocket. The hand was steady. The jaw was rigid. He removed the small plastic card, the air transport pilot certificate that represented decades of his life, and placed it in her hand. I want to note for the record, he said, that this passenger entered the cockpit during a critical phase of flight, which is a violation of regulations, and that her presence constituted a distraction to the crew. Moss wrote something on her clipboard. Ms. Brooks, she said, do you wish to respond to that characterization? Mr. Morales, Imani said, addressing the first officer who was standing close enough to hear. When I entered the cockpit, what was the state of the aircraft? Diego was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of hesitation, the quiet of precision. The autopilot was disconnected. We had a fuel imbalance that I had not identified. Captain Thorpe was fighting the controls manually, and the oscillations were increasing. He paused. Ms. Brooks identified the fuel display, directed me to open the cross-flow valve, and directed Captain Thorpe to re-engage the autopilot. Within seconds of autopilot engagement, the aircraft was stabilized. Moss wrote more on her clipboard. Thank you, Mr. Morales, she said. Harlan stood very still. Ms. Brooks, Moss said, we'll need a full statement from you tonight if possible. Of course, Imani said. I'm also prepared to provide documentation of the events at Teterboro this morning, including the conduct of Captain Thorpe and Malcolm Reyes of the Meridian FBO operations team. That documentation has already been sent to your office by my chief of staff. I received it, Moss said. All of it. She looked at Harlan one more time. Captain, you'll receive written notification of the suspension within hours. You may contest the action through the standard administrative process. Harlan said nothing. He took a step toward the edge of the ramp, toward the parking lot beyond the fence. Another step, then another. He walked away from his aircraft for the last time in a pressed white shirt with 4 gold epaulets, and the ramp lights made his shadow very long and very thin and very quiet on the asphalt behind him. Imani watched him go. She did not feel triumph. She felt the specific, clean exhaustion of having been right about something for a very long time and of having finally been in a position to say so. Moss was methodical in the way of people who trust process over theater. She set up her preliminary interview with Harlan at a field table near the government sedan, while Latrice stood nearby with the folder and the organized documentation that made improvised denial difficult. The questions were precise and unanswerable. Did you visually inspect the fuel load before signing the dispatch release? Did you verify both wing tank quantities against the weight and balance sheet? At what point in the flight did you become aware of the imbalance? Harlan attempted the professional approach. He was calm. He used the correct terminology. He spoke with the measured confidence of a man who had navigated difficult conversations for decades and understood that authority of manner could sometimes substitute for authority of fact. I supervised the fueling, he said. My pre-departure review indicated the tanks were within acceptable parameters. Your pre-departure review, Moss said, conducted from inside the FBO building? A pause. I was in radio contact with the line crew. But you were not on the ramp during fueling. Standard practice allows for remote supervision when Captain Thorpe, Moss said, and there was no cruelty in her voice, but there was an absence of patience for the direction he was heading. The standard requires visual verification of fuel quantities before signing the dispatch release. Your signature on the release is time-stamped. The key card entry record for Meridian Aviation shows you swiped into the FBO building and did not exit until after fueling was completed. She looked at him over her reading glasses. You signed a release for a fuel load you did not verify. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. While Moss continued with Harlan, Imani called David Haynes, Director of Operations at Pinnacle Charter Management. She stepped away from the group toward the nose of the aircraft. "David," she said when he answered, "I'm on the ramp at PDK. I'll give you the short version. The pilot you assigned to my aircraft failed to verify his fuel load before departure, nearly lost control of the aircraft over South Carolina, and this morning, on the ramp at Teterboro, told me the bus stop was on the main road while I was trying to board my own plane." She paused. "I'm terminating the management contract. I want written confirmation by midnight." "Ms. Brooks," David said, "I cannot overstate how deeply sorry we are. I was not aware of today's events in full until your operations director, Gerald French, has been aware for years that Captain Thorpe has complaints against him for conduct virtually identical to what happened today," Imani said. "French reviewed every complaint and closed every one of them without investigation. I have documentation of all the complaint records and French's sign-off dates. My counsel will be contacting Pinnacle's board in the morning. Not French, the board." A silence. "There is also a matter I want to address separately," she continued. "French and Captain Thorpe have an existing personal relationship. I do not know if that relationship influenced the complaint reviews. I am not making an accusation tonight. I am telling you that my counsel will be looking at it." "Understood," David said. "One more thing. The young man from Teterboro Line Service who filmed what happened this morning, his name is Kai Santos. He documented something that your organization had the power and the responsibility to catch years ago. He is 26 years old and he is flying to Atlanta on my aircraft tomorrow. I want Pinnacle to provide a formal written acknowledgement of his role in documenting this incident, in writing to him personally. I'll have that drafted tonight." She hung up. She walked back toward the aircraft. Diego Morales was standing near the nose gear, apart from the others, with the posture of someone waiting for a verdict that had not yet been delivered. He had done the right thing in the cockpit. He had also spent over a year as Harlan's first officer without filing a complaint. Imani stopped beside him. "You did the right thing when it mattered," she said. "I should have done it before it got to that point," Diego said. "He's talked about passengers the way he talked about you today. Not always as directly, but the meaning was the same. I told myself it wasn't my business, that the complaints weren't mine to make, because I hadn't been the target." "Will you give a statement to Inspector Moss about today?" "Yes, and about before. The pattern of comments, the handling of previous passengers. If she asks, I'll tell her what I know." "She'll ask," Imani said. Something settled in Diego's face. The specific quiet of a person who has decided to stop carrying something they've been carrying for too long. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner," he said. "Tell the truth to the inspector," Imani said. "That's what you can do now." He nodded. And when Moss came to him minutes later with her clipboard and her reading glasses, he told her everything. The comments, the pattern, the specific incident months ago when Harlan had mocked a black family in business class to the ground crew, thinking the channel was crew only. It was not crew only, not crew. Moss wrote for a long time. Brooke had been standing near the baggage compartment since they deplaned, watching everything with the expression of someone who had made a decision and was waiting for the moment to act on it. When Moss approached her, Brooke did not wait to be asked. "He didn't do a walk around," she said. "I was in the galley when the fueling was done. He was on his phone in the FBO lobby. He signed the release from inside the building." She paused. "I saw him sign it. He was laughing at something on his phone while he signed it." Moss's pen moved. "And the events on the tarmac this morning," Moss said. "What did you observe?" Brooke told her. She told her about the first remark, the cleaning crew question, the snort on the stairs, her own snort, acknowledged with the bluntness of someone who was done softening things. She told her about Malcolm's grip on Imani's arm and the quality of Imani's response to it. She told her about over a year of following Harlan's lead and what that had cost her. "I want to be clear about one thing," Brooke said when she had finished. "I knew it was wrong, not after the fact. While it was happening, I knew, while it was happening, and I participated anyway." She looked at Moss steadily. "I'm not trying to minimize that." Moss lowered her clipboard slightly and looked at Brooke over her glasses. "That kind of honesty," Moss said quietly, "is what makes an investigation go somewhere useful instead of nowhere." Brooke nodded. She unfolded her arms. She felt for the first time in a long while like someone who had stopped shrinking. Malcolm's situation was handled in a short phone call that Latrice made from the FBO parking lot with her voice at its most precise. She advised him that his physical contact with Imani on the Teterboro ramp had been captured on video, that the video had millions of views as of that evening, and that Imani's legal team would be filing a formal complaint with the FAA and the airport authority in the morning regarding ramp access conduct and unauthorized physical contact with an aircraft owner. She advised him that Imani was not pursuing criminal charges. She advised him, in the same tone with which one might describe a change of weather, that his ramp access at Meridian Aviation was suspended pending review. The phone call took minutes. Malcolm did not say much during it. The formal paperwork took time. Moss gathered statements, secured the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, collected Harlan's certificate, and noted for the record that the cross-flow valve had been opened during the flight by the first officer at the direction of the aircraft owner, who identified the fuel imbalance after entering the cockpit during a period of abnormal aircraft behavior. When the paperwork was done, Harlan was standing near the edge of the ramp. He had been standing there for minutes, not trying to leave, not trying to argue, just standing at the boundary of the light with his hat in his hands. Imani walked over to him. She did not do this for catharsis. She did it because there was one thing she wanted him to know, and she wanted to say it to his face with no one else close enough to hear. "You spent decades learning to fly," she said, "and seconds this morning deciding who deserved to be on a plane." Harlan looked at her. His face had the quality of stone that has been in the weather for a long time, worn gray still. "I made a mistake," he said. "I know that." "You made a pattern," Imani said. "Complaints before mine. People who filed formal documentation and were ignored. Whatever you want to call this morning, a mistake, a misread, a professional lapse, it did not begin this morning." He looked away, toward the plane, its engines cold, its lights dark. "Flying was all I had," he said. It was not an argument. It was just a fact, quietly stated. "I know," Imani said. "But the people in those complaints had things too. Time they spent being redirected, being questioned, being made to feel like they didn't belong somewhere they had every right to be. That cost them something. You just never had to see it." She turned and walked back toward Latrice in the Escalade. She heard him say something quietly behind her. She didn't catch the words, and she didn't turn back. Some things do not need to be heard. They only need to be said. Moss handed Harlan the formal notice of certificate action. His air transport pilot certificate was suspended pending full investigation. He had days to contest. The investigation would take months. She handed him a card with the relevant contact information. Then she picked up her clipboard and walked back to her government sedan. Harlan stood on the ramp in the February cold with his hat in his hands and the notice in his pocket and the quiet around him that comes when the machinery of consequences has finished its most immediate work. He walked to the parking lot. He got into a rental car. He drove away into the Atlanta night. The Pinnacle board received Latrice's email that evening. By shortly after, their general counsel had called Latrice back to confirm that Gerald French had been placed on administrative leave pending internal review. By later that night, the board chairwoman, a woman named Victoria Langford, who had joined Pinnacle's board months ago precisely because she was tired of organizations that handled complaints by making them disappear, had sent Imani a personal email. It was 3 sentences long. "Ms. Brooks, what happened today is unacceptable, and it did not begin today. I am personally committed to ensuring that the review of the complaint records under French's management is thorough, independent, and publicly disclosed. You have my word." Imani read it twice. Then she forwarded it to Latrice with a single word, "Watch." Latrice sent the file late that night with a subject line that said, "Only you need to see this before morning." Imani was already in bed. She read it on her phone. The file was the result of Latrice's deeper review of Pinnacle's complaint records obtained through a combination of what Brooke had submitted in her evening email to the board, what Diego had disclosed to Moss during his extended statement, and what the board's own preliminary internal review had pulled up in the hours since Victoria Langford had started asking questions that Gerald French had not previously been asked to answer. The number was not a few, it was 12. 12 complaints filed against Harlan or related to his conduct over a period of years. Most of the complainants were people of color. Many had received no written response. Of the few who received form letters, some had followed up asking for a status report and received nothing in reply. But that was not the part that kept Imani awake. The part that kept her awake was the structure. Latrice had found an internal Pinnacle document, a crew performance review template used by French's department. In a section labeled Passenger Management, there was a field for noting high-maintenance passenger profiles. The field had no formal definition, it had no criteria, it was left to the supervising crew's discretion. Across Harlan's reviews over years, this field had been filled in multiple times. Most of the times, the passenger described as high maintenance was a person of color. In several of those cases, the passenger had subsequently filed a complaint, the same complaint that French had then reviewed and closed. The review template was not a policy, it was not written guidance. It was a form, a tool that had been quietly embedded in performance review culture and used without definition, without oversight, and without anyone in leadership asking what it was actually measuring. It was not something one person had invented. It was something that had grown in the space where oversight wasn't. Imani put her phone down on the nightstand. She thought about the doctor in Chicago who had filed a complaint years ago and never heard back. She thought about the executive who had waited in a lounge. She thought about the young man asked twice for identification. She thought about how many of them had ultimately done what people do when institutions don't respond to them. They stopped using the institution. They adjusted their behavior to accommodate the thing that was wrong. They bought different tickets, chose different carriers, told other people about their experience, and received sympathy and nothing more. She picked up the phone again. Send everything, she wrote to Latrice. The template, the complaints, all of it. Not just to Pinnacle's board and the FAA, to the aviation industry press. Let it be a public document. If anyone is looking for evidence that this is not an isolated incident, here it is in Pinnacle's own paperwork. Latrice replied in under a minute, sent, Aviation Week, Flying Magazine, Bloomberg Transport, and AP Wire, embargoed until morning. Imani set the phone down. She looked at the ceiling. The problem with a single story, a viral video, a dramatic ramp confrontation, a captain losing his certificate, was that it was possible to watch it as a story about one person. Harlan was the villain. Imani was the protagonist. The video was the evidence. The consequences had been delivered. Story over. But that was not the story. The story was the form with the unmeasured field. The story was the complaints and the non-responses. The story was French's sign-off week after week, year after year, and the silence of everyone who worked within a culture that was producing that outcome and did not ask what the outcome meant. The story was the doctor in Chicago who had adjusted her travel plans around something that should never have been her burden to work around. She would not let it be told as a single story. She had the platform now, the documentation, and a board chair at Pinnacle who had used the word independent and the phrase publicly disclosed in the same sentence without being asked to. That was somewhere to start. She closed her eyes. In the morning, there would be calls and coverage and the machinery of institutional response cranking into motion. There would be the Pinnacle review, the FAA investigation, the legal conversations, the industry coverage. There would be Kai Santos's flight arriving soon. There would be the work of figuring out how to make what had happened to her useful to the people whose complaints had been discarded. All of that was tomorrow. Tonight she was a tired woman who had straightened an orchid multiple times on a flight where the pilot forgot to check his fuel and who had come home and had tea and was now going to sleep. Kai Santos arrived at Imani's office the following day wearing clean clothes and the particular alertness of someone who had not slept well but had made peace with that. His video had millions of views. He had turned down multiple podcast requests, a social media consulting offer, and an invitation to appear on a morning talk show. He had not turned down this meeting. Imani stood when he came in and shook his hand. She had the smallest conference room, the one with the window that faced the flight path into Hartsfield-Jackson, where planes descended in a steady, peaceful sequence visible through the glass. "You didn't have to post it," she said. Kai looked at the window for a moment. "I've watched things like that too many times from that truck," he said, "and gone home and felt like I was a piece of the problem every time I did nothing." He paused. "I didn't know who you were. I posted it because it was wrong, not because of what it might become." Imani nodded. "That's the part that matters." She told him about the complaints, about the performance review template, about the people who had filed formal documentation and received silence. She watched his face as she described it. Not the shock she might have expected, but a particular tired recognition, the face of someone who has suspected a thing for a long time and has just been handed the evidence. What happens now, he asked. Pinnacle is under independent review, the board chair committed to public disclosure. The FAA has Harlan's certificate. The complaint records are going to the aviation press this morning. She paused. And I want to offer you something, but I want to be careful about how I say it. He looked at her. Vantage Logistics is expanding our ramp operations in the Mid-Atlantic. We need people who understand ground operations and have the judgment to lead teams. There's a management training track. The compensation is significantly better than what you're earning at Meridian. She held his gaze. I'm not offering you this because I feel I owe you. I'm offering it because you did the right thing when it cost you something, and you did it clearly, without drama, from a fuel truck at 26 years old. That is the quality I build with. Kai was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the planes descending through the window. Can I think about it? Take a week. He took days. He said yes. Brooke Landry did not lose her certificate. She was placed on a performance review by Pinnacle, which mattered less than it would have months earlier because Pinnacle's charter client portfolio had contracted significantly following the story's coverage. And Gerald French's departure had changed the atmosphere of the organization in ways that were not yet fully visible, but were already being felt. Imani wrote her a letter, not a job offer. Imani had meant what she said about needing crew she could trust without reservation, and that trust was not yet established. The letter was something else. It was short paragraphs handwritten on plain paper. It said you were part of something wrong, and then you told the truth about it. Those two things can both be true at the same time. I am not asking you to carry the first one forever. I'm asking you to remember it, not as punishment, but as the thing that makes you someone worth trusting now. What you do next is who you are, not what you did before. Brooke framed it. She kept it on her nightstand for years. It was the most useful thing anyone had ever said to her. Months later, Teterboro, Ramp 4. Imani's Escalade pulled up at the west entrance. She stepped out in a tailored charcoal coat with her canvas tote bag over one shoulder. The same bag, still scuffed, still bearing the ghost of the ink stain near the pocket. Some things do not need to be replaced. At the base of the stairs of N720NO stood Captain Elise Monroe, fully returned from leave, trim, focused, warm without being familiar. She did not block the path. She did not assess the outfit. She smiled. Good morning, Ms. Brooks. Hours to London. We're ready when you are. Good morning, Elise. Imani walked up the stairs. At the top, she paused, the instinctive pause of a person who has survived something and still carries the echo of it. She looked back across the ramp. Near the far end of the field, a figure in a neon orange safety vest was moving luggage carts for a budget charter operation. Back bent, hands on the cart handle, face turned down against the wind. Harlan Thorpe, FAA, suspension upheld after investigation. Pinnacle contract terminated. The blacklist letter sitting in his file at every management company on the eastern seaboard. He drove a Hyundai Sonata now. He did not look up. He did not see her. She did not wave. There was nothing to wave at. She turned and entered the aircraft. Inside, the orchid was in its white ceramic vase, a new one, perfectly balanced, placed with the small and specific care that her mother had always given to the one flower she kept on the kitchen table in their Baltimore apartment. No matter the season, no matter the month, no matter how tight things were, the door closed, a pressurized, solid thud that sealed the cabin and the cold February air out, and the quiet of altitude in. The engine spooled to life. The plane began to move. The sky outside the oval window was open and enormous. It did not care about a hoodie or a canvas bag or a worn pair of sneakers. It did not care about a boarding pass or a manifest or who a man in aviator sunglasses had decided belonged where. It was simply there, cold and blue and wide, and entirely available to anyone with the courage and the will to reach it. Imani put her seat back. She closed her eyes. She went home. Imani didn't fight because she wanted attention. She stood still because she had spent years learning that silence has its own authority, and that the most powerful thing in the world is a person who knows exactly who they are, even when everyone around them has decided otherwise. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe that every person deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter what they're wearing, no matter where they come from, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. We tell stories like this every week because they matter, because you matter, and because the world gets a little closer to right every time someone refuses to look away. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next.